Ricky Gervais tore into Keir Starmer with brutal honesty, exposing his contradictions and leaving him scrambling for words. The internet exploded, memes took over, and in seconds, Starmer's polished image shattered. How did a comedian outmatch a politician on live TV? Ricky Gervais is a name that sparks instant recognition. For most people, he's the mastermind behind The Office, the guy who made awkward, cringeworthy comedy an art form. Then there's Afterlife, a series that somehow blends dark humour with deep, emotional storytelling. And of course, Extras, where he hilariously mocked the entertainment industry from the inside. But Ricky isn't just a comedian who makes people laugh, he's also one of the most outspoken public figures when it comes to politics, free speech, and hypocrisy.
I'm your typical liberal, lefty, snowflake, champagne socialist, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic sort of guy.
He has never been the type to play it safe or sugarcoat things. Political correctness? Not his thing. Censoring his opinions to avoid backlash? Not a chance. That's exactly why people either love him or absolutely can't stand him. He says things exactly as he sees them, whether it's about politicians, Hollywood elites, or society in general. This brutal honesty has made him a hero to many and a villain to others. But one thing's for sure, he doesn't care. There's a reason Ricky Gervais has managed to stay relevant for decades. He isn't just another comedian cracking jokes. He's someone who holds up a mirror to the world and forces people to look at the uncomfortable truths. His comedy isn't just about making people laugh. It's about making them think.
So, if you do win an award tonight, don't use it as a platform to make a political speech, right? You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world.
Take his Golden Globes monologues, for example. Most celebrities go up on stage, thank their agents, and stick to a safe, scripted speech. Ricky! He tore into Hollywood, calling out fake activism, hypocrisy, and the ridiculousness of millionaire actors pretending to be relatable. He looked them straight in the eye and said what millions of people at home were already thinking. You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. That's Ricky in a nutshell. He's the guy who reminds people that those in power, whether they're politicians, celebrities, or corporate giants, aren't above criticism.
What's happened is, when you've had privilege so long, equality feels like oppression. They're basically saying, some people want some of our equality.
Yes.
Well, of course they do.
Yes.
That's it.
Damn them, damn them, damn.
It's no surprise that his humour has extended beyond the entertainment industry. In recent years, he's become more vocal about British politics, especially when it comes to issues like free speech, government overreach, and the working class. Some might say he's turning into a political commentator, but in reality, he's just continuing what he's always done, calling out nonsense wherever he sees it.
Well, there's no such thing as a side anymore. It's ridiculous because it goes left and right, and then extreme left, extreme right, extreme left, extreme right.
Ricky Gervais doesn't align himself with any political party, and that's exactly what makes his take on politics so interesting. He doesn't defend politicians just because they're on the right side, and he doesn't attack them just because they belong to a certain party. Instead, he criticises hypocrisy, broken promises, and censorship, no matter who's responsible.
And freedom of speech is so important these days. And I've reached the age now where I don't care anymore. You know what I mean? It's like,
welcome aboard,
what's the
Ricky.
worst that can happen?
Welcome aboard.
I'm offended. I'm going to die.
His stance on free speech is one of his most talked about opinions. He believes people should be able to joke about anything, no matter how controversial, because that's how comedy works. In his view, just because someone is offended doesn't mean a joke should be banned. He's openly criticised governments and social movements that push for censorship, arguing that limiting speech doesn't solve problems, it just creates more.
The people in charge were breaking the rules, having these parties in their lovely gardens. I think I've been naive all my life. It's not till now I just go, why do we trust them? Of course we shouldn't trust.
Then there's his take on politicians. He doesn't trust them. Not because he's some conspiracy theorist, but because, in his words, why would you trust the people in charge? That's how they got there. You think the most honest, selfless person ends up running a country? To Ricky, politicians regardless of party say what they need to say to get elected, then do whatever benefits them once they're in power. He has called out both the left and the right for their contradictions, and he has no problem roasting them all equally. His recent focus on British politics has been particularly interesting. Whether it's questioning Keir Starmer's definition of the working class, criticising tax hikes, or pointing out how politicians say one thing and do another, Ricky has made it clear that he sees through the political games. He's not afraid to speak about things that others tiptoe around, and that's exactly why people pay attention when he talks.
Now it's sort of taken a downward turn. This last year hasn't been so good. There's always been, and it's true, you know, my opinion is worth as much as your opinion, but people started thinking that my opinion was worth as much as your facts. And that's just not true. And that came from people finding their groups, and on social media they found their mobs.
Some people argue that comedians shouldn't get involved in politics, but Ricky has a different perspective. He believes comedy is meant to push boundaries and challenge authority. He isn't standing on a soapbox, trying to tell people how to vote. He's just pointing out the absurdity of it all. And let's be honest, when Ricky Gervais mocks a politician, it often resonates more than any serious political debate ever could.
It is the honour and the privilege of my life to be elected as leader of the Labour Party.
Keir Starmer is a name that has been making headlines in British politics for quite some time. He's the leader of the Labour Party, the man who's supposed to be offering an alternative to the Conservative government. On paper, he's everything you'd expect from a politician looking to take the top job smart, experienced and well-spoken. Before stepping into politics, he was a lawyer, a respected one at that, even earning the title of Sir for his contributions to law and justice. He made a name for himself in criminal justice reform and human rights, which helped him build a strong reputation. But being a good lawyer and being a good leader are two very different things. Since taking over Labour, Starmer has tried to present himself as a leader for the working class, someone who understands the everyday struggles of normal Brits. He talks about fairness, economic stability, and the need for change. He paints himself as the guy who will fix what the Conservatives have messed up. But that's where the problem starts. Many people don't believe him. On the surface, Starmer fits the classic image of a Labour leader. He comes from a relatively modest background, worked his way up through education and law, and eventually became involved in politics. Unlike some politicians born into privilege, he genuinely had to work hard to get where he was. That's something his supporters admire about him. He wasn't handed his success, he earned it.
Working class is families that work for their living, earn their money through going out to work every day.
But here's the thing, being working class isn't just about where you come from. It's about how well you understand the struggles of everyday people. And this is where Starmer starts to lose people. He often talks about fighting for the working class, but his policies don't always reflect that. There's a disconnect between what he says and what he actually does, and people are starting to notice.
My vision for Britain is simple. I want this to be the best country to grow up in and the best country to grow old in.
When he first took over as Labour leader, there was a lot of hope that he would bring fresh energy to the party. After all, Labour had just suffered a massive defeat in the 2019 election under Jeremy Corbyn, and they needed someone who could turn things around. Starmer positioned himself as the guy who could rebuild Labour's reputation, move it closer to the centre, and win back voters who had switched to the Conservatives. But has he really succeeded in doing that? That's up for debate.
5 years' time, we will be able to look back and say you are truly better off, your public services are working properly, and the economy is working for everyone.
One of the biggest complaints against Starmer is that he's all talk but no action. During his leadership campaign, he made a lot of promises about taxes, public services and workers' rights. But once he got into power, many of those promises seemed to disappear. For example, he initially pledged not to raise taxes on working-class families, but tax hikes have still happened under his leadership. People don't forget things like that, especially when they're already struggling to pay their bills.
Don't like.
How arrogant are you to think that you deserve to go through life with no one ever saying anything that you don't agree with or like?
And then there's his stance on free speech. A lot of people feel that Starmer's Labour Party is becoming too controlling when it comes to public discourse. He's supported policies that some say restrict what people can and can't say, particularly on social and political issues. Ricky Gervais, for one, has been vocal about this, questioning whether Starmer really believes in free speech or only in a speech that aligns with his party's views. In a time where more and more people are worried about censorship and political correctness going too far, this has become a major point of contention.
The loss to our aid budget and all budgets would be far more profound if we go back to instability, and I'm not prepared to do it.
Immigration is another issue where Starmer has struggled to convince the public. The UK has had ongoing debates about border control, asylum seekers, and the economic impact of immigration. Labour under Starmer hasn't taken a clear stance that resonates with everyone. Some feel he's too soft on the issue, while others believe he hasn't provided any real solutions. Either way, his vague approach hasn't done him any favours. Then there's his handling of international relations. Starmer and his party have openly supported certain American politicians, particularly Vice President Kamala Harris. While this might seem harmless, it has raised eyebrows because of what it could mean for the UK's relationship with the US. Former President Donald Trump still holds a lot of influence in American politics, and by aligning with one side too openly, Starmer may have risked damaging future UK-US relations. Some see this as a rookie mistake, a sign that he's not quite ready to navigate the complexities of global politics. But perhaps the biggest issue people have with Starmer is that he seems out of touch with the struggles of everyday Brits. Labour was traditionally the party of the working class, the party that stood up for ordinary people against corporate greed and government overreach. But under Starmer, Labour has shifted, and some feel it's becoming just another version of the elite political establishment. He talks about representing the working class, but does he really understand their struggles? Many Brits are dealing with rising living costs, job insecurity, and failing public services. They want a leader who genuinely understands their frustrations, not just someone who gives well-rehearsed speeches. Starmer, despite his intelligence and experience, often comes across as a politician who is more focused on public image than real change. This is why people like Ricky Gervais have been so critical of him, because they see through the polished exterior and want real accountability. At the end of the day, Keir Starmer is in a tough position. He's trying to win over both traditional Labour voters and those who have shifted towards the Conservatives. He's balancing the need to be progressive while also trying to appeal to the centre. But by trying to be everything to everyone, he risks being nothing to anyone. If he wants to truly lead the UK, he needs to show people that he's more than just another career politician. Otherwise, the growing criticism against him will only get louder. It was supposed to be just another political panel discussion, the kind that airs late in the evening when most people are too tired to care. Keir Starmer was there, doing what politicians do best, giving polished answers, dodging difficult questions, and trying to appear relatable to the average voter. But then, there was Ricky Gervais.
I think he's got that childlike narcissism that he's sort of, if he says it, it sort of might be true. But
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of troll about him.
Ricky wasn't there to play along with the usual scripted political talk. He was there to say what everyone at home was probably thinking. And the moment he got the chance, he did exactly that. The show started off like any other political discussion, stiff, predictable, and filled with vague promises. Starmer spoke about the Labour Party's plans, throwing around phrases like working class representation and economic justice. The kind of language politicians love to use when they want to sound like they care. Then Ricky, who was sitting across from him, raised an eyebrow. He had been quietly listening, but his expression said it all. He was unimpressed. The moment the host gave him a chance to speak, he went for it. He wasn't interested in the rehearsed political slogans. He wanted answers. Real answers. Ricky turned to Starmer and asked the one question that instantly changed the tone of the discussion. What do you mean by working class? At first, it seemed like a simple question, but Starmer's response proved otherwise. He started talking about families who go out to work every day, but his explanation quickly became a mess of half-finished sentences and vague definitions. Ricky didn't let it slide. So middle-class people work too. Where's the distinction? He asked, cutting through the political jargon like a knife. Starmer tried again, this time rambling about ordinary hopes and aspirations, but it only made things worse. Ricky, in typical fashion, leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "That sounds like something a politician says when they don't actually know the answer." The audience laughed. Starmer did not. What made it even more brutal was how effortlessly Ricky exposed the problem. Starmer, a man who claimed to represent the working class, couldn't even define what that meant without sounding like he was making it up on the spot. At this point, Starmer looked uncomfortable. He was used to handling tough political interviews, but this was different. This wasn't a journalist carefully wording questions. This was Ricky Gervais, a comedian who didn't care about political etiquette. Starmer tried to recover by listing his own background, saying how he had come a long way from his school days and how his journey was an example of working class aspirations. But the damage was already done. It didn't answer the question. It just sounded like another politician trying to prove something instead of actually addressing the issue. Ricky, shaking his head, muttered, "So, the working class is just anyone who tries to get a better life. That's everyone, mate." That was it. The moment that sent social media into a frenzy. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were all over Twitter and TikTok. People weren't just talking about Starmer's weak response, they were laughing at how easily Ricky had exposed the emptiness of his words. The tension in the studio was obvious. Starmer could feel that he had lost control of the conversation. He tried to steer it back by talking about Labour's policies, but no one was paying attention to that anymore. The viral moment had already happened. Ricky had won this round, and Starmer knew it. When the segment ended, the cameras cut away, but the internet had already picked up the moment and run with it. Memes, reaction videos, and comment threads exploded overnight. Some people cheered Ricky for exposing what they saw as classic political nonsense, while others criticised him for being too harsh. But one thing was clear. Keir Starmer had just been publicly humiliated, and no amount of political spin could change that. Ricky Gervais has always had a way of cutting through the noise. He doesn't need fancy words or rehearsed speeches. He just calls it as he sees it. And during his heated exchange with Keir Starmer, he didn't hold back. He went straight for the issues that people actually care about: taxes, free speech, and international politics. While politicians are known for dodging uncomfortable topics, Ricky made sure there was no escape. One of the biggest things that got under Ricky's skin was Starmer's handling of taxes. Before coming into power, Starmer made a big promise: no tax hikes for working class people. It was a pledge that helped him gain support. Because, let's be real, nobody likes paying more taxes, especially when they're already struggling with the cost of living. But once Starmer was in charge, things started changing. Taxes went up, and it wasn't just the super rich who felt it. Middle-class families, small business owners, and regular workers all saw an increase in their tax burden. And that's exactly what Ricky called out. "So let me get this straight," he said, with his signature sarcastic tone. You promise one thing to get votes and then do the opposite once you're in power. Classic. The way he said it wasn't just funny, it was painfully accurate. People at home were probably nodding along because they've seen this kind of thing happen over and over again. Politicians say whatever they need to say to get elected, but when it comes time to follow through, it's a different story. What made Ricky's comments sting even more was that he wasn't making up accusations. The tax hikes were real and people were feeling the effects of them. Bills were getting higher, wages weren't stretching as far, and business owners were struggling to keep up. Starmer could talk all he wanted about why the increases were necessary, but the reality was simple. He broke his promise, and Ricky wasn't about to let him get away with it. Ricky has always been a strong supporter of free speech, so it's no surprise that he had a lot to say about the UK government's increasing control over what people can and can't say. In recent years, there's been a growing concern that the government is cracking down on free expression. Whether it's through strict hate speech laws, tougher regulations on protests, or the push to police offensive language. Ricky didn't hold back on this one. So now, if you criticise the government too much, you could end up in trouble. That's democracy for you, he said, shaking his head. He brought up the case of Tommy Robinson, a controversial activist who was arrested for leading protests against government policies. Now, whether you agree with Robinson or not isn't the point. The real question is, was he arrested because he broke the law, or because he was saying things the government didn't like? That's what Ricky was getting at. People are starting to wonder if the UK is slowly heading towards a place where criticism is punished. Are protests going to be limited more and more? Will comedians, journalists and regular people have to start watching what they say for fear of legal trouble? Ricky, being a comedian who relies on saying things how they are, is naturally against this kind of control. What made this part of the conversation so intense was that Starmer didn't have a good answer. He tried to talk about the importance of maintaining order and preventing harmful speech, but it came off as an excuse for more government control. Meanwhile, Ricky's point was clear. If the government can decide what people are allowed to say, then free speech isn't really free anymore. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.